The desert was silent. Too silent. The kind of silence that pressed against your ears and made every small sound feel like a thunderclap. A lone gas station stood in the middle of the dusty landscape, its neon sign flickering weakly against the harsh sun. A man walked slowly toward the pumps, his steps measured, calm. He wore a black leather jacket, dark gloves, and sunglasses that reflected the blazing sky. Steven Seagal. Not a movie star here. Not a man looking for attention. Just a figure who carried calm like armor. The first roar of engines shattered the silence. 7 motorcycles appeared over the horizon, kicking up clouds of dust that raced toward the gas station like a storm. Each bike was ridden by a man who thought the desert was theirs, that the lone figure ahead was just another easy target. They circled him quickly, engines growling, boots scraping gravel. The leader, a tall man with a scar across his jaw and a leather vest adorned with patches, dismounted, cracking his knuckles deliberately. "Looks like we found ourselves a hero," he sneered, a smirk curling across his face. The others laughed, revving engines as if to announce their dominance. One kicked at the gas station sign, making it sway violently. Another spat on the ground near Seagal's boots. They were sure of one thing: numbers made them invincible. But Seagal didn't flinch. He didn't even look startled. He simply adjusted the cuff of his glove, eyes hidden behind dark lenses. There was a calmness in his posture, a precision in the way he shifted his weight, that made the bikers hesitate, just for a heartbeat. The leader leaned closer, trying to provoke him. "You lost, old man? Or just waiting for someone to show you the way?" Seagal didn't answer. Not with words. Not yet. He was observing, noting each stance, each twitch, every subtle movement. Decades of martial arts training had taught him to see everything. The slightest lean of a shoulder, the micro shift of weight before an attack, the overconfidence in a smirk. 7 men, roaring with engines and bravado, thought they held power. They didn't know. This wasn't a confrontation they could win. Not with their speed. Not with their strength. Not with their numbers. They were about to learn in the desert's blazing sun that true power doesn't roar. It waits. It watches. And when it strikes, it leaves no doubt. Steven had stopped for gas. Just a quiet pit stop in the middle of the endless desert. The sun burned overhead, painting the asphalt in shimmering waves. A lone figure, calm, unhurried, methodical. The bikers noticed him the moment they arrived. A solitary man, seemingly unarmed, in their territory. That alone made him a target. Their leader, tall and imposing with a scar running down his jaw, circled him like a predator sizing up prey. "You lost, old man?" he taunted, letting his words hang in the dry air. "Or just waiting for someone to show you the way?" The other bikers laughed, revving engines, boots scraping gravel. One kicked at Seagal's motorcycle, a harsh metallic clang echoing across the empty desert. Another spat on the ground, narrowly missing the black leather boots of the man they assumed was weak. But Seagal didn't flinch. Not a muscle twitched. He didn't shout, he didn't curse, he didn't even glance at the provocations. He simply adjusted his gloves, slid his fingers over the smooth leather as if reading the tension in the air. Calm. Controlled. Unshakable. Every detail mattered. Every micro-movement of the bikers was logged in his mind. The way the leader's shoulders tensed when he shifted weight, the subtle sway of another as he revved his engine, the nervous tightening of a fist hidden behind a smirk. Steven's decades of Aikido training had taught him to see the invisible, to read threats before they arrived, to move before conflict even began. The bikers' confidence swelled with each moment of silence. They assumed numbers and intimidation equaled strength. 7 men, roaring engines, shadows stretching across the hot asphalt. One solitary man. What could he do? The leader stepped closer, leaning down just enough to stare into Seagal's hidden eyes. "You think you can just stand there? Alone? You've got nothing, old man." Seagal didn't respond verbally. He didn't need to. His posture spoke volumes. Deliberate, measured, every movement a quiet warning. A coiled energy waiting to spring. The desert seemed to hold its breath. Even the dust settled for a moment, as if acknowledging the tension between calm mastery and reckless bravado. One of the younger bikers, trying to impress, stomped forward and kicked at Seagal's boot. Another elbowed his shoulder, laughing, sure he'd provoke some reaction. The others joined in, circling closer, revving, shoving, taunting. They were certain this would be over quickly. That fear and numbers were enough. But Steven didn't react. Not yet. He simply shifted his stance, subtly, almost imperceptibly. The smallest adjustment, foot slightly forward, weight balanced, shoulders loose, yet every action calculated. It wasn't aggression. It wasn't challenge. It was observation. He was mapping the battlefield, noting the angles, the gaps, the potential openings. 7 bikers thought they had power. They didn't. Because Steven Seagal had trained for decades to be ready for moments like this. Not for fame. Not for cameras. Not for applause. He had trained so that, in a world full of arrogance and aggression, calm and control could become a weapon far sharper than fists or guns. The desert air crackled with tension. Engines growled. Boots shifted. The leader flexed, ready to strike. Confidence radiated from the 7 men like heat from the asphalt. And yet, in that heat, that arrogance, that noise, there was one man who didn't need to shout, who didn't need weapons, who didn't need numbers. One man who already knew they were about to make a mistake they'd never forget. The desert heat pressed down on the gas station, but the tension in the air was heavier. The 7 bikers, engines idling and dust settling, began to close in. Their laughter was nervous now, forced bravado masking a flicker of doubt. One mistake could cost them more than pride. One of the younger bikers, eager to prove himself, kicked Steven's motorcycle hard. The bike wobbled slightly, metal scraping against the gravel. "Hey, say something, old man," he yelled, trying to provoke a reaction. Another shoved Seagal's shoulder. The contact was minor, nothing more than a gesture of dominance, but it was enough to test him. The leader cracked his knuckles again, stepping closer, his face twisted into a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "You gonna fight back, or are you just gonna stand there looking like a statue?" Seagal remained calm. His eyes, hidden behind dark sunglasses, tracked every movement. His body didn't twitch. He didn't speak. He didn't even shift weight unnecessarily. Yet in that stillness, he radiated a controlled force that made the bikers hesitate, though they didn't realize it yet. Then the leader swung. Not hard, not to hurt, just to test. Another biker lunged forward in tandem. In the blink of an eye, one of them stumbled. Not because of brute force, Seagal had barely moved, but because the attacker's own momentum and misjudged angle betrayed him. A muffled grunt, a shuffle, and the first biker hit the ground. Gravel sprayed like sparks. The others froze mid-step. Silence fell across the desert. Even the engines seemed to quiet in respect, or fear. The leader's smirk faltered. The others glanced at each other, uncertainty creeping in. Confidence evaporated like heat off the asphalt. They had assumed numbers guaranteed victory. They hadn't considered skill, awareness, or calm precision. What did you do?" whispered one of the younger bikers, wide-eyed, stepping back. Steven stepped closer, slow and deliberate. Not aggressive, but deliberate. The desert seemed to hold its breath with every measured footstep. The leader raised his hands slightly, instinctively, sensing the shift in the dynamic. "You underestimate discipline," Seagal said, his voice calm, even, but carrying weight that made them instinctively recoil. Another biker lunged, perhaps out of pride, perhaps out of desperation. Seagal redirected him effortlessly. The man went down without a single loud noise, like a leaf falling. Another followed. Within seconds, 3 more bikers hit the ground, scrambling to regain balance. Only 2 remained upright, their arrogance replaced by sudden, sharp fear. This wasn't chaos. This wasn't rage. This was precision. Control. Awareness. Every movement calculated to prevent serious harm yet demonstrate undeniable dominance. The leader stepped back, shaking his head. His bravado had evaporated. He glanced at the men around him, some sprawled on the ground, others frozen in place. They had all underestimated him. Their assumptions, their laughter, their arrogance, all dissolved in a heartbeat. The desert, once silent, now seemed heavy with the weight of their realization. They were outmatched. Not by strength alone, not by weapons, not by numbers, but by discipline and calm mastery. 7 men thought they had power. They didn't. Seagal adjusted his gloves once more. The smallest movement, the simplest gesture, radiated an unspoken truth. Real strength is quiet, controlled, and always aware. The desert was silent again, but this time it wasn't peaceful. It was tense, heavy, loaded with fear. 7 men had come to assert dominance, confident in numbers, loud engines, and the arrogance that comes with it. But now, everything had changed. Steven Seagal stood in the middle of the dust, calm, composed, unshaken. His leather jacket caught the sunlight, gloves perfectly adjusted, sunglasses reflecting the horizon. Every movement he made was deliberate, each step measured. He didn't shout. He didn't swing wildly. He didn't even raise his voice. And yet, the bikers could feel the control radiating from him. The leader tried to regain composure, his jaw tight, his hands flexing as though preparing for a fight he didn't understand. "You can't stop all of us," he barked, forcing a tremor into his words. Seagal tilted his head slightly, almost imperceptibly, like a predator observing a herd of prey. You still don't understand, he said calmly. Numbers don't make strength. Loudness doesn't make power. Intimidation doesn't make respect. Another biker, driven by ego, tried to lunge forward, swinging a fist at Seagal. In an instant, with the smallest redirection of momentum, the man hit the ground hard, scattering gravel like sparks in the sun. Another attempted a kick, just a test, but Seagal intercepted, using their own force against them. Down they went, one after another, falling in a precise rhythm like dominoes in slow motion. 5 bikers hit the ground within seconds. 2 remained standing, but their confidence was gone. Fear had replaced arrogance. Their wide eyes darted between the fallen and the calm figure who hadn't even broken a sweat. It wasn't brute force. It wasn't chaos. It wasn't rage. It was control, discipline, awareness, mastery. Each movement calculated to neutralize without unnecessary harm. The lesson was clear. They had underestimated him. That mistake alone had consequences. The leader's face paled. For the first time he hesitated, realizing that all his threats, all his bravado, had no weight here. The desert, once theirs by assumption, now belonged to a man who didn't need to prove anything. They had come expecting fear, compliance, maybe a quick show of strength. They had received something far more terrifying, calm certainty. Seagal stepped forward, slow, deliberate, each footfall crushing gravel with quiet authority. Enough, he said. No shouting. No anger. Just clarity. A younger biker tried to swing one last time, desperate, reckless. Steven redirected him effortlessly, and the man crumpled to the ground. Only the leader and one companion remained upright, wide-eyed, frozen. Every step Seagal took, every gesture reinforced the same truth. Discipline always trumps arrogance. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. There was no celebration, no need to prove dominance. The lesson had been taught. 5 bikers sprawled on the ground, 2 standing like statues of disbelief. The dust swirled, the engines idled, and for a moment the desert held its breath. You picked the wrong man, Seagal said softly, almost to himself, almost to the wind. But the bikers heard every word. Every syllable sank into their minds like a stone dropped into still water. They had assumed weakness. They had assumed numbers guaranteed victory. They had been wrong. This was no longer a confrontation. It was a revelation. A lesson written in quiet control and deadly precision. The desert, once a place of their imagined power, had witnessed a new truth. Real strength is silent, calm, and disciplined. The 2 remaining bikers stepped back, fear etched on their faces. They understood instinctively that further resistance would accomplish nothing. Not humiliation. Not victory. Just more lessons learned in dust and silence. Seagal adjusted his sunglasses, glanced at the horizon, and exhaled slowly. The lesson was complete. Backhand index pointing right, and this was only the beginning. The desert sun blazed overhead, but the heat no longer seemed as intense. The tension in the air had replaced it. 5 bikers sprawled on the gravel, 2 standing stiffly, faces pale and eyes wide. The roar of engines had faded into a low hum, almost inaudible against the sudden silence. Steven Seagal stood, calm as ever, his black leather jacket glinting in the sun, gloves adjusted, sunglasses reflecting the endless horizon. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to threaten. His presence alone carried the weight of the lesson he was about to deliver. The leader, still trembling, clenched his fists, trying to muster some last shred of control. You can't stop us all. You think you're stronger than 7 men? He spat, voice shaking, trying to mask the fear creeping up his spine. Steven shook his head slowly, his calm voice cutting through the tension like a knife. You still don't understand, he said. You confuse noise for power, numbers for strength, arrogance for respect. You think that intimidation is proof of dominance. It isn't. True strength is calm, discipline, awareness, respect. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. The bikers exchanged uneasy glances. Some had never been spoken to like this. Never had their arrogance met with such quiet authority. You could have killed us, whispered one of the younger bikers, his voice trembling. The admission sounded more like a confession than a statement. Seagal's gaze softened, not with pity but with clarity. I didn't need to, he said. That's the point. True power does not require violence to make its point. It doesn't need to humiliate. It doesn't need to dominate. It teaches. It guides. It corrects. The leader swallowed hard, realizing that all his threats, all his posturing, had crumbled in the face of something far greater than strength alone. Every swing, every shove, every attempt to assert dominance had failed, not because of luck, not because of brute force, but because discipline, awareness, and preparation always outweigh arrogance. Steven took a step closer, his boots crunching against the gravel. The bikers instinctively took a step back, even though the man was not moving aggressively. It was the calm certainty in his stance, the unspoken confidence that came from decades of mastery, that radiated more authority than any gun, any fist, any engine roar could. You think fear comes from weapons, he continued, voice steady. You think respect comes from loudness. But you're wrong. Fear is temporary. Arrogance is fragile. Numbers can never replace awareness, preparation, and self-control. Discipline lasts forever. The younger biker whispered again, voice shaking, I didn't realize. His words trailed off, uncertainty and awe mingling in his tone. Steven adjusted his sunglasses, looking each of the 7 men in the eyes. You assumed weakness. You assumed control. You made your choice. And now, you understand the consequences. Not through violence, not through destruction, but through clarity, calm, and precision. That is true strength. The leader's scarred jaw tightened. He had been a man used to power and intimidation. But now he realized the difference between loud power and quiet mastery. His confidence had been shattered not by fists, not by chaos, but by calmness. Seagal's gaze swept across the bikers one last time. One day you'll remember this moment. You'll remember how arrogance faltered. How noise failed. How calm, awareness, and discipline taught a lesson without cruelty. That lesson will stay with you far longer than any fear ever could. The desert remained still. The wind carried fine dust and lazy swirls around the fallen bikers. The sun blazed, but the heat was secondary to the intensity of the lesson learned. For the first time they saw clearly, strength is not about proving dominance. It's about understanding responsibility. It's about knowing the difference between protecting and punishing. Steven Seagal didn't raise his fists again. He didn't need to. He had made his point. The bikers' bravado had evaporated completely. Their arrogance, once towering and untouchable, had crumbled under the weight of quiet mastery. One of the younger men whispered, almost to himself, he didn't even try to hurt us. No, said another softly, realization dawning. That's the point. He didn't need to. The leader finally nodded, swallowing hard, understanding at last that he had misjudged the man in front of him. He had assumed weakness. He had assumed control. He had been wrong. And in that quiet desert, amid dust, engines, and the blazing sun, one truth remained clear. True strength does not seek to dominate. True strength commands respect. True strength is calm, disciplined, and aware. Backhand index pointing right. Should strength be used to protect, or to dominate? The desert lay still once more, but the silence was different this time. It wasn't the quiet of emptiness, it was the quiet of comprehension. The bikers, 5 sprawled on the gravel, 2 trembling upright, now understood that their assumptions had been fatally flawed. They had believed in the power of noise, numbers, and intimidation. They had assumed that arrogance could conquer skill. They had been wrong. Steven Seagal adjusted his gloves with the same measured calm he had carried through the encounter. Every movement was deliberate. Every gesture radiated a quiet authority that needed no applause, no cheers, no demonstration beyond what he had already done. He walked slowly toward his motorcycle, the black leather jacket glinting in the desert sun. Each step stirred fine dust around him, the small clouds catching the sunlight like smoke in the air. The bikers watched in silence, still unsure whether this was a pause before a renewed attack or a sign that the man had finished. No one needs to be hurt to understand a lesson, Seagal said, his voice even and unshakable. You chose disrespect. You assumed weakness. You learned consequences. The leader tried to speak, but words failed him. His bravado had evaporated in the desert heat, replaced by something far more powerful than fear, realization. He had misjudged the calm man in front of him, misjudged the value of discipline and preparation, and now he saw clearly the difference between arrogance and true mastery. One of the younger bikers glanced at the fallen, then at Seagal and whispered, "He could have destroyed us." Seagal didn't respond. He simply lifted his motorcycle upright with effortless precision, balancing it as though it weighed nothing. The action was subtle, graceful, and yet it radiated undeniable strength. There was no flourish, no show of force, just control, discipline, mastery. The remaining 2 bikers stepped back instinctively. Their eyes, wide with awe and fear, tracked Seagal's every motion. Engines idled nervously as if sensing the shift in authority. What they had once assumed was weakness had revealed itself as the opposite. Calm, calculated, and absolute control. Seagal swung a leg over his motorcycle, sitting with perfect poise as if the world around him moved in slow motion. He started the engine. The low growl was smooth, controlled, and deliberate, nothing like the harsh revving of the bikers' machines. One by one, their jaws clenched, realizing that speed and noise were meaningless here. The lesson had already been learned. The leader finally spoke, voice low, almost reverent. You didn't even need to fight us. Why? Seagal's gaze, hidden behind dark sunglasses, swept over the 7 men. Real strength, he said slowly, does not seek to dominate. It teaches without cruelty. It corrects without violence. Numbers, intimidation, loudness, they are temporary. Discipline, awareness, and calm, those last forever. The 2 standing bikers exchanged glances, their minds replaying the last few minutes in disbelief. The one sprawled on the ground groaned, realizing that their confidence had been shattered not by rage or brute force, but by subtle mastery. Every move Seagal had made had been measured, precise, and necessary. No one had been seriously harmed. No one had been humiliated. Yet the lesson had been unforgettable. Seagal lifted the visor of his helmet, or rather, adjusted his sunglasses, and glanced toward the horizon. Dust swirled lazily around his motorcycle as he prepared to ride. The bikers, for the first time, truly understood what it meant to misjudge a man. They had assumed strength could only roar. They had learned, in the desert's blazing heat, that true power is calm, measured, and controlled. With a smooth, deliberate motion, Seagal twisted the throttle. The engine purred, powerful yet restrained, and he rolled forward. Dust trailed behind him in a controlled plume, a visual testament to the lesson he had delivered. 7 bikers had thought they ruled the stretch of desert. One man had shown them who truly held power. Even as he disappeared into the horizon, the desert seemed to carry the lesson with him. Silence returned, but it was different this time. It carried understanding, reflection, and the unmistakable mark of respect earned, not demanded. Backhand index pointing right. If you believe real strength is calm under pressure, like this, comment below. The desert was quiet once again, but it was a different kind of silence. Not empty, not ordinary. It was the silence of understanding. The kind that follows when arrogance meets its match, when assumptions crumble, and when a lesson has been truly learned. Steven Seagal rode slowly, dust trailing behind his black motorcycle like smoke curling in the desert wind. The engines of the 7 bikers lay idle, the roar and bravado of earlier reduced to a trembling hum of disbelief. 5 bikers remained sprawled on the gravel, recovering, catching their breath, hearts pounding in awe. 2 stood, faces pale, eyes wide, hands trembling, not with anger but with the dawning comprehension of the mistake they had made. The leader, scarred jaw tight, wiped dust from his leather vest, his mind racing. Every boast, every intimidation tactic, every act of arrogance had collapsed in front of a man who didn't shout, didn't swing wildly, and didn't need weapons. The realization hit him like the desert sun. He had been outclassed, outthought, and outmaneuvered, without a single moment of unnecessary violence. Steven's figure cut a calm silhouette against the blazing horizon, a study in discipline and controlled strength. He didn't look back. He didn't gloat. He didn't savor the lesson delivered. There was no malice, no thrill in dominance. Only clarity. Only mastery. Only the quiet power of knowing that respect is earned, never demanded. The bikers watched him go, dust settling around them like a curtain drawn across their own arrogance. Their minds replayed every moment. The stumble of the first man, the effortless redirection of another, the precise way Seagal had turned their own momentum against them, and the unwavering calm in every gesture, every stance, every measured word. They had believed in the power of numbers. They had believed in intimidation, in loud engines, in the fear their presence could generate. But all of that had been illusions. Seagal's lesson wasn't over yet. As he reached the far edge of the desert, he paused, resting a gloved hand lightly on the throttle, and spoke, not to the bikers but to the desert itself, as if the lesson belonged to all who might witness it. True power, he said, voice calm but carrying across the empty expanse, is measured. True strength is disciplined. Arrogance can intimidate but it cannot teach. Fear is temporary. Respect lasts forever. You do not need violence to command authority. You do not need chaos to demonstrate control. You only need awareness, preparation, and calm mastery. The bikers, still frozen in the dust, absorbed every word. The younger ones whispered among themselves, awestruck, "He didn't even try to hurt us." "No," said another, voice low, trembling. "That's the point. He didn't need to. The leader clenched his fists, realizing the depth of his misjudgment. He had assumed weakness in the solitary figure. He had assumed that loudness and numbers equaled power. He had been wrong. This encounter wasn't about humiliation. It wasn't about punishment. It wasn't even about winning. It was about consequences, about clarity, about understanding the difference between arrogance and true mastery. Seagal swung his leg over his motorcycle with effortless grace, the black leather of his jacket gleaming in the sun, his gloves snug on the throttle. With a smooth, controlled twist, he started the engine. The growl was powerful, yet measured, like a quiet declaration that strength does not need to shout. As he rode off, the bikers remained rooted to the spot. 5 sprawled on the gravel, heads lowered, minds racing. 2 stood, eyes tracking the retreating figure, finally understanding that strength is not loud. Strength is calm. Power is not chaos. Power is control. The desert seemed to return to its normal rhythm, but the lesson lingered, heavier than the heat, sharper than the sand underfoot. Every engine roar that had once signaled dominance now felt hollow. Every act of arrogance now seemed fragile. The bikers' minds had been imprinted with a truth they would never forget. Preparation and calm mastery outweigh chaos and bravado every time. Steven Seagal didn't need to look back. The lesson had been delivered, and the desert itself seemed to acknowledge it. Respect had been earned, not demanded. No one was seriously harmed. No one humiliated unnecessarily. And yet, the weight of the encounter lingered, a silent, unspoken reminder of what true strength looks like. Even as he disappeared over the horizon, the desert held the story. Wind swept across the gravel, dust dancing in long, lazy swirls. The bikers remained behind, humbled, reflective, their previous confidence shattered but replaced with a deeper understanding. And for anyone who witnessed it, through observation, through imagination, through the retelling of the story, one truth became undeniable. True power is calm. True strength is control. Discipline always outlasts bravado. Respect is earned, not assumed. The desert returned to quiet. The engines remained still. The bikers would remember this day forever, not for pain, not for fear, but for the lesson.